Mario Siammas has worked at the British High Commission in Nicosia since June 2023. Previously, he held the position of researcher at the Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus. He is also an independent historian and studied at Pantheon University of Social and Political Studies, Athens, and Brunel University of West London, UK, before completing his PhD in Defense Studies at King's College London in the UK. He has mostly published on the Cypriot contributions to the Second World War and the modern history of Cyprus. And this is a topic I've been wanting to do justice for the past couple of years. And I'm really happy that Marios has agreed to interview for this. So Mario, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andreas. The pleasure is all mine. I definitely share the opinion that this is a time frame that not many people in Cyprus know about. And every time I speak with friends, relatives, it's always, tell me what happened during the Second World War. So it is an underestimated period for Cyprus, and many thanks for inviting me for this interview. A small disclaimer before we start. Any opinion, criticism that I expressed during the interview is my personal opinion and does not reflect any other affiliations that I may have at the moment.
Thank you, Mario. And just to echo a point that you said a second ago, I do think you're right that our understanding of Cyprus in World War II, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, is really superficial, isn't it? It's just like, yeah, we know Cyprus was involved, but even in talking with my parents about Cyprus in World War II, and telling them the things that I learned while reading your book, which is a fantastic read, by the way. They're just not aware of it. I wasn't aware of it. I mean, they knew I have a grandfather who was in the Second World War, but beyond that, it's just so opaque. We don't get that information, and it's great that you are finally here to kind of shine some light on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, Cyprus history goes around more modern events. So 1955-59, the Yugo struggle, 1974, and in my opinion, it's totally understandable. These two events have really shifted Cyprus and have formed Cyprus as it is at the moment, especially 1974. So a lot of attention is pointed at those two periods. Nonetheless, history should be holistic. I'm not saying that we should let the modern past go and not teach what happened in the past, in the modern past in schools, but we should also pay attention to other events in the modern history of Cyprus. So 1931 riots, the Second World War, the interwar period, the struggle in Greece, for example, after the end of the Second World War, the civil war in Greece, and how that affected Cyprus. So these are periods that have their own significance for the island, and they should have their share of attention in history books. Hopefully, slowly, this will change. So hope is still there. And my book comes to fill in the gap. There are some works on the subject, not so holistic, and unfortunately, some of the writers strongly express their personal belief, political belief. But I think it's okay for a historian to have to express her own belief and political expression. But you also have to put down history and events in a holistic perspective. So this is what I'm trying to do with the book, separated in many chapters covering the war, the bit pre-war and a bit after the war, but 1939 to 1945 is the core of the book. covering a lot of aspects. So yeah, here we are.
You're absolutely right that a lot of this, being Cypriot, we're almost inclined to be very politically charged, and a lot of these topics touch upon very heavy political issues, and sometimes they're hard to pull the two apart. But there's things that eventually do tie in to the post events from World War II. I believe that do tie in directly to the events after World War II in Cyprus, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think the most of our focus here is going to be on what led up to the Second World War and Cyprus's involvement, and a little bit after that as well. But I really want to start with the 1930s, because I don't really know much about Cyprus in the 1930s. I mean, in your book, you even mentioned this thing called palmerocracy. Never heard of that before. There's even some riots. You want to just tell us a little bit about what Cyprus was like in that decade?
Well, when we say palmerocracy, we refer to Richmond Palmer being the governor of the island. And his policies, the time that he was governor of Cyprus, so palmerocracy originates from his surname, Richmond Palmer. So after 1931, when the riots happened in all over the island, and with Nicosia being in the epicenter, and the riot leading to the burning down of what we know now is a presidential palace in the center of Nicosia. It used to be the center of the government in Nicosia, so it was wooden at the time, so it was all burned down. It was built shortly after. So yeah, the riots started. Some say from a political perspective, some others say due to poverty. In my opinion, it definitely had a political background. There are a couple of monographs that point out the political character of the riots. But yeah, referring to palmerocracy is the period after 1931 and the October riots, Octobriana, as we say in Cyprus, in Greek language. So the period after the riots is characterized by strict measures, extremely strict measures on the island's inhabitants, censorship, assembly prohibitions, restriction of political freedoms, lifting of political liberties, very, very strict measures of policy. For the British rule in Cyprus to suppress any possibility of such riots happening again. And the mastermind behind all this was Richmond Palmer, the governor of the island, which was the governor from 1933 to 1939.
Okay. This was a period then of oppressive government. Would we characterize it as that?
Yes. It was an oppressive government. Very, very limited freedoms for Cypriots. So imagine lifting of political freedoms, exiles, sending people abroad, sending people up the mountains, and prohibiting them from coming to the cities, living all alone in secluded areas. So yeah, it was the measures that were taken were very, very strict. It was the only solution, as seen by the British rule at the time, to avoid any such occurrence in the future.
Now, things would change with Governor Battershill, and he would come in to replace Palmer, and he was viewed as more liberal, if I understand that right. So, what did Cypriots expect from him? What sort of changes did they hope for?
Well, the new governor, New Cyprus, as he was. He held a governmental position in Cyprus in the past. He was really loved by the Cypriots. He was very approachable. He was more liberal, definitely more liberal than Palmer. So on the 10th of August 1939, we have a change of guard in Cyprus. Battershill was more liberal than Palmer. We know that as a fact, because from the first moment that he stepped on the island, he said that he would change things. He was previously a colonial secretary for 3 years, from 1934 to 1937. He was a sympathetic character. He had a sympathetic reputation. But he was unfortunate, as 2 months after his arrival, war broke out, putting any hold to any major reforms he had planned to apply in Cyprus. So lifting of censorship, it was in his plans, political freedoms as well. We can elaborate on this from a secure perspective, as we don't really know what he was planning to do. So historians of the future can say that, can argue between two things. The first one is he was planning to do things and he didn't have, the war broke out and he didn't have time to do it, or he was just promising things just to be sympathetic and he wasn't really planning to do it. So we have one coin, two sides. But anyway, we know as a fact that he was a better person than the previous government. He was more sympathetic, more liberal. So in my personal belief is that the reforms he was planning to do, lifting any restrictions, even on a slow pace, would eventually materialize if war hadn't broke out.
And of course, war did break out in 1939. And for those who may not know, obviously Hitler's war machine is expanding. It's consuming all of Europe, and Great Britain declares war. What's Cypriot opinion of the war at this time? Did they? What's the popular public opinion?
Public opinion is twofold. So we have two opinions at the same time, shared, I would say 50-50 by the population on the island. So the first one is that Cyprus is far away from danger. It's a small island in the Eastern Mediterranean. The war is in Central Europe, so Germany, France, the UK, obviously, Austria and other Central European countries. So that's far away from Cyprus at the moment. You can only get there by ship. You can travel there. You need many, many days. So it's far away. But at the same time, if anything happened in the proximity of the island, Britain had the obligation to protect its asset. So Cyprus, Britain had the obligation to protect the Cypriot citizens who were British citizens at the time. And on the other side, we have Cypriots who were eager to join the army, fight, go with the Allies, fight with Britain, more loyal to the crown. A lot of Cypriots were part of the colonial government at the time. This was also enhanced at the beginning, but I think we'll have the opportunity to say more about this later. But yeah, it was a twofold opinion. Some were eager to go fight, let's help Britain. Some others were, let's stay away from this trouble. It's not our fight. Britain can solve its own problems. Let them fight in Central Europe. We're far away from danger. So this is the public opinion in Cyprus at the time.
I just want to go back to Governor Battershill for a brief moment. You had said, had war not broken out, probably a lot of those reforms would have been implemented. Did the need for Cypriot support in the war effort lead to Battershill later making more liberal commitments in the long run? I'm a little vague as to the order of governorship in Cyprus, but I'm just curious about that. Were promises made by him for after the war?
There is a significant amount of lifting of prohibitions. So political action was allowed, censorship was lifted. You can see newspapers coming out in Cyprus with a deeply political content and context as well. So this alone is an example of lifting of prohibitions. Demonstrations occurred. Not major, but there were demonstrations. The first ones since the new governor arrived in Cyprus were in favor of the British and in favor of Greece, because it was the time when Greece joined the war. So we had demonstrations cheering for the king, cheering for Greece, cheering for war. Let's join the war. Let's help our allies. So either way, these were demonstrations. In 1932, 1933, if these occurred, the army would definitely go and stop all this. So there were instances that we can see that there was lifting of prohibitions, and it was very, very significant.
Now you write, and this is a quote from your book. Units from Britain, India, Australia, and France were transferred to the island to protect it from the possibility of enemy invasion, end quote. Now, do we know if invasion was ever seriously considered by the Axis powers?
These units originating from Britain, India, Australia, France, everyone passed from Cyprus at the time, but invasion was considered as a possibility after the fall of Crete. And this is an important point. So before the fall of Crete, Cyprus was far away from action. So the stepping point from Europe to the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Middle East, to Egypt, to the Suez Canal, the stepping stone was Cyprus. Crete fell on the 1st of June, 1941, but Operation Barbarossa, so the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany and other Axis allies, started on the 22nd of June. So the invasion of Cyprus was only considered for 21 days. This was also reflected in many archives of the War Office at the moment, of the Foreign Commonwealth Office, of the Colonial Office at the time. We have, when Crete fell, we have to prepare. It was late because Crete fell, and soon after that, the British administration in Cyprus started preparing. So even if this was a possibility, it would be really, really late for the British to defend the island. But nonetheless, the British kept on reinforcing the island until many, many years after 1941. So for 2 or 3 years after Crete fell, the island kept being reinforced. So even if the idea at the time was not abandoned, if the outcome in the Soviet Union was not the one that we now know, maybe the next target would be Cyprus, because the entire Greece was under German occupation. So maybe a stepping point to the Middle East might have been in Cyprus.
Yeah, and that was actually my next question, which is what sort of strategic value would Cyprus have for the Axis powers? Is it simply as a stepping stone, like you said, to the east?
Well, apart from that, which is, in my opinion, is the most important thing, we also had mineral sources as well. So Cyprus has forests. At least at that point, it had more forests than now. So you can see it from the British rule in Cyprus. Wood is being cut during the war from 1939 until 1945. A lot of wood is drawn from Cyprus. Copper as well, the pyrite as well. So there are some, there were at least mineral sources in Cyprus. But the most important one is the stepping stone for the Suez Canal and a possible expansion to the rest of the Middle East.
And you mentioned that the British took measures in response. So what, can you be a little bit more specific? Like what sort of measures did they take? And a similar question is, what did the British do to prepare the local populace in case of invasion in light of Crete's capitulation in 1940?
There is an ongoing debate at the time between the British administration in Cyprus, the War Office, the Colonial Office, the Foreign Office, who is going to take responsibility of all these expenses. So there is an intergovernmental debate who is going to take charge. Eventually, the War Office, it's a coalition of officials saying that we will all contribute to this. You see increased spending on the island's infrastructure for military use, and this is one of the most important aspects. So roads were built. Even roads that we know now were built at the time. communication across the island was developed at the time. Harbors, airports in Limassol. Maybe not so much airports, so I would classify them as airfields. So Lagadamia, their Lagadamia military camp, which is still used by the army now in Cyprus, from the Republic of Cyprus, National Guard, was built at the time. Limassol had an airport, Larnaca. The Salt Lake in Paralimni area was also used as an airfield. Paphos. Apart from that, you see barracks in the area of Athalassa, which was forested at the time. There were barracks built, fortifications, bunkers on the coastal line of Cyprus. So all these were built and improved during the course of the war. And another thing is the training given to Cypriots at the time. So when you hear the sirens, you need to hide, you need to go into the trenches that were built. But after a couple of times, when the sirens went out and there was no indication of enemy activity, Cypriots became ignorant. So the sirens, we can hear the sirens, nothing's happening. After 2 or 3 times, even if sirens were going off, nothing was happening. People kept being at their jobs, walking down the streets. So ignorance, definitely ignorance. So there was some training for gas mask, how to use it. Flyers were given in all the villages. But for someone that hasn't witnessed war, hasn't seen what war can bring to the local population, it's understandable that after a certain time, no one was paying attention to all these precautions. Now to the second part of the questions of your question, incendiary bombs. For this, the British had also wanted to prepare the Cypriots for poison, for gas masks. After a point, though, also when warnings were given out, also nothing was happening. But there was a state of tension and uncertainty. But as people didn't know what war means, they didn't really pay attention to the war meaning.
Eventually, Cypriots would enlist, and I think you pointed it out in your book. I think you quoted, you mentioned in Andriko Varnava's book, who I've had on the show, that as far as enlistment goes, peasants and laboring classes were given a little option, but to enlist and serve in the British Army, at least during World War I. Are motives largely the same in the Second World War? Are people enlisting because it's a way of kind of lifting themselves out of poverty?
Indeed, it is the same in World War II as it was in World War I. So 1939 and 1940, these 2 years were characterized by widespread unemployment and industrial unrest. 1st of September, war broke out. The mines eventually suspended their operations. They did not accept any new workers. They were firing people due to the export reduction of mineral materials from Cyprus. And eventually volunteers recruited into the armed forces mainly due to the pay at the beginning. So 2 shillings per day was the salary of a volunteer in the British Army, and that was 3 times what the laborer could expect to receive for a day's work. So it was a very, very good option, especially due to the fact that the British administration in Cyprus was saying, we will have food for you, we will give you clothes, you'll have a bed to sleep, you will receive training, your life won't be risked, you won't go at the front line, so you will be be part of the supporting troops. So that was it was like an excursion for Cypriots, getting paid, getting fed, getting clothed, sending money to their families for those who have family in Cyprus. So yeah, it was a good option for them given the circumstances.
What I found really surprising is that some Cypriots were actually rejected from joining. And that took me aback, especially, I'm sure you're going to talk about this for one particular reason, but what reasons were these based on, these rejections?
Especially the ejections were done especially at the beginning of the war. Britain hadn't entered the war at the time, so it was between Germany and Poland and France. So the attack on Britain didn't happen yet, or the attack on the British colonies. So manpower was not needed at that time. So that's why we see rejections, especially at the beginning. As war progresses, rejections were fewer and fewer. And by the end, they were minimal. So it had to be a very, very important reason. But especially at the beginning, the main reasons for rejections were the lack of height, the lack of education, the commission of serious crimes. But as it proved later, these factors were very subjective. The vetting process at the beginning weeded out the undesirable applicants, and they were given, those rejected were given a rejection certificate, and they could reapply if the circumstances changed, if they took lessons, for example, to learn English or whatever other reason. But there were also a number of factors that, apart from physical condition, that could put a person in this group. So a criminal record, initially for any offense, would preclude recruitment, and the same applied to agitators. So we discussed about this previously. So people who took part in the 1931 riots and were arrested were prohibited from joining the army. People deported as well. However, communists were the least desirable, followed by nationalists. So if you had a political affiliation at the time or expressed a political opinion, you were disqualified from joining the army.
Okay, let's talk about training a little bit. How were Cypriot volunteers trained? How were they prepared? How long was the training process? Where were they stationed on Cyprus before they were sent out into Europe?
At the beginning, they were drafted in villages or in their cities. After that, they were transferred in Polemidia, in Limassol, where the main training camp was located. Some of the barracks are still there, but they're part of the National Guard barracks at the moment. But you can see it's round, and it's a typical British establishment as it was in the 1940s. So the initial plan was the training to be provided in the Nicosia barracks. Then that's changed many areas from Famagusta to Troodos Mountains, but eventually that was the British authorities in Cyprus were led to train Cypriots in Limassol. It was close to the port. It was in the center of the island, so it could accommodate traveling needs from across the island. At the beginning, the training was very, very basic. So marching, following orders, acronyms, handling weapons, but very, very lightly. And when we're talking about weapons, we're talking about simple rifles, not even machine guns. So the Lee Enfield rifles at the time, we have 300 men, who were at the beginning enlisted, trained, and then sent to Egypt. So we have this training camp in Limassol, and then which was the basic training, and then for more training, all men were sent to Egypt.
And then not only in Egypt, they were also sent to France. I think I was really taken aback. Well, I shouldn't say I think. I was taken aback to learn that there was even some Cypriot presence in northern France, and they actually participated in the famous evacuation, the successful evacuation of Dunkirk.
Yeah, indeed. And the fact is that once they went to Egypt to get trained with 300 Cypriots, after a few weeks, following very, very simple training again, they were sent to France, and they didn't bear any weapons. It was just them and their mules. So it was planned that they were going to support the British expeditionary force in France. So it's the time that the UK decides to Great Britain decides to join the war. So it sends the British expeditionary force to assist the French. The front collapses and it all evolves to the Dunkirk evacuation. Indeed, Cypriots were also evacuated, but they had to leave their mules behind. In fact, they were ordered to take the mules to the forest and kill them for the mules not to fall into enemy hands. But because Cypriots had a special connection to their mules, to their animals, there are a lot of stories that say that the mules were released in the forest and not killed.
Yeah.
They didn't want to kill them, so they left them in the forest. But at the end, so much material was left behind. A couple of hundred of mules wouldn't change the course of the war. So yeah, we have Cypriots being evacuated from Dunkirk. They didn't really help in France. They were just carrying their mules around. It was play.
You actually mentioned that it's been suggested that they were in fact like poorly prepared for France. I mean, adjusting to Western Europe's winter apparently was very challenging. That I think some even commented on how calm they were due to their ignorance around bombing. They had no reaction.
There are a lot of stories going around. You can see them in narratives from veterans that were interviewed. But even British soldiers at the time, NCOs and officers, say that they were traveling at night to not being avoid being spotted by airplanes and shot or bombed. So they were hiding in French cities during the day, hiding under houses, in cellars. So yeah, Cypriots were enjoying French wine and gambling all the time because they had to kill their time really during the day. So drinking French wine and gambling seemed like a dream come true for some of them. And they weren't even moved from bombs falling all over the place. So yeah, I think they were fairly relaxed.
In 1940, a Cypriot regiment, the Cyprus regiment, is established. And my understanding is at first there was some hesitation in creating the Cyprus regiment. So I guess twofold question. Well, what is the Cyprus regiment, and why would there have been some hesitation to create it in the first place?
So we have the Cyprus regiment, which is established in 1940. There was hesitation to whether Cypriots would join, and also hesitation from the British if this is a right thing to do, to train Cypriots how to shoot, how to become soldiers eventually, if this will turn against the British rule in Cyprus at some point. So this was the hesitation from the British rule. We can also find this hesitation from Cypriots, from those that we said earlier that were not eager to join the war because it was a British obligation to protect Cyprus and not a Cypriot one. Cypriots at the time were saying, we are British citizens, so let Britain bring her soldiers to Cyprus and protect us. So you have hesitation on two sides at the same time. Now, the second part, many of the Cyprus regiment eventually is the military establishment of the Cypriots who take part in the Second World War. Even if at one point you have Cypriots enlisting in Australia, in South Africa, in Egypt, in the UK, in the US, in any other European country that they were residing, they were transferred to the Cyprus regiment to serve, especially those who knew English, who spoke English at the time. It was easier for the NCOs and the officers of the British Army to communicate with them once they were transferred in the Cyprus regiment. So by Cyprus regiment, we say that it's the entity of Cypriots fighting in the Second World War, and this regiment had 12,200 something men as part of it.
Was there a shift in popular opinion at this time? I know at the start of this interview, we talked about what was public sentiment, and it was sort of 50-50. By 1940, by the establishment of the Cyprus Regiment, do we see a more positive outlook on Cypriot enlistment and support for the war effort?
The shift in popular opinion came only after Greece was attacked by Italy. And from how things evolved, Britain became an ally with Greece against the Axis. So this is the first time, what we said briefly earlier, that we see demonstrations in favor of the king, in favor of the crown, in favor of the allies of the British government. So people were going out and singing the Greek anthem and then God Save the King. So it's once Greece entered the war, it was a rapid shift, same-day shift of sentiment, and it was those months in October 1940 that there was an incline in recruitment. So numbers spike at the time. So hundreds of men were recruited because they were eager to go in the war and help Greece eventually, even if this didn't happen.
You know, we mentioned Cypriots in Egypt. Some made their way to France, and of course, we're going to talk about Cypriots in Italy. But I was surprised to learn that some served in Sudan as well. What sort of role? I mean, there's actually a quote that you have from Lieutenant General Sir William Platt, where they say, where he says that one of the most important recognitions of the part played by the Cypriots was made by him. I was really taken aback at how much of a variety of fronts that Cypriots served in.
Well, Cypriots served in Sudan, but they also served, I'll mention a few countries because it's really important to know that Cypriots were almost across the globe. So Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt, Sudan, that we said, Libya, the Western Desert, the entire North Africa, Italy, Greece, France. Eventually, some units went to Germany. So all of these countries, north and south of the Mediterranean Sea, Cypriot served in. But yeah, coming back to what you said about Lieutenant General Sir William Platt on the operations in Eritrea, up until that point, it was widely considered that animal transport was merely for use in garrisons, base areas, to release motor transport units for other purposes, for more heavy loading. But history proved these conceptions to be wrong, as eventually decisive battles and breakthroughs during subsequent conflicts, and mentioning the Sudan and Keren as well, the Battle of Keren, were won by with the help of mules. You also have the Greeks in the Albanian mountains, the Monte Cassino. So when Platt recognized Cypriots, he said that I won't quote. I will say what I remember from his recognition, that the mule companies that went into Sudan and moved to the front line, they were used to moving at night. The tracks were steep, they were narrow, and they proved themselves invaluable because eventually it was the only means of transferring material to the front line. You cannot expect from a motor vehicle to go up on a steep rocky trail of not even 1 meter width. So the only means of getting ammunition, food, what a soldier needs to fight is horses and mules. So yeah, it was the first important recognition for the Cypriot muleteers.
And of course, there was their role in Monte Cassino in Italy, which was a very famous Allied war effort, for lack of a better word. Why was the Cypriot role so integral to the Allied success in the invasion of Monte Cassino?
So you have a steep mountain. It's a monastery. Monte Cassino is a very very steep hill. It was surrounded by smaller hills, so it's a great defensive mechanism for the Axis powers at the time. So the only means to go up there is walk or drive a mule. So once defensive positions were dug in, you had to get material to soldiers. So the only means is, again, as in the Battle of Keren, is mules and horses. So every night, between 700 and 1,400 mules would set off in a single file along those mountain paths. And an infantry battalion would require on average 50 mule loads per night. So imagine how many infantry battalions you had at the time for 700 and 1,200 mules to go up the mountains in the night. They had found innovative ways to hide the mules, so the hooves were wrapped with cloth in order to reduce the noise for their metal shoes on the stone. Although rocks at the time would betray their positions, and eventually the Germans would target the mules and their operators, and they will, unfortunately, many of them died on the slopes of Monte Cassino. And an important fact for me, for myself here, is that what ignited my spark to study the Second World War was that my grandfather was a muleteer as well. He fought at the Battle of Monte Cassino, and he came back to Cyprus with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And for some time, he was just sitting on a chair, not talking to anyone. He was so traumatized from what he had seen during the war. And I was so curious what happened during the war. When I was a kid, I even asked him once, naively, now that if I go back, Granddad, did you kill anyone during the war? He didn't even reply, and he told me, let's change the subject. So he told me something else. So that ignited the spark. So the Monte Cassino battle ignited the spark for my research to materialize into the monograph and researching Cyprus in the Second World War. So going back, closing the parenthesis here from my personal story, that these mules had the duty to establish dumps of material below and on the hills, and some of the attacks were even delayed just because the mules didn't make it up to the top. So this alone shows how important the mules were at the time to carry the munitions to the front line.
Thank you for sharing that story, and that's entirely understandable. You know, a little bit different, but I this is not during World War II, but I mean, I have an uncle who fought in 1974, and the way you just described your grandfather's reaction to Monte Cassino and just that 1,000-yard stare that I would imagine he had, my uncle had the same reaction, and you can tell that there was some deep-seated trauma, in recounting those horrible events. But I think you have a quote in your book that I feel like is worth reading here, because just to show you how far-reaching Cypriot contributions were for the Second World War. You write, Cypriots were comrades in battle and in training with men from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and India. Men from countless from countries of England and the highlands of Scotland. Men from France, Poland, Greece, and Arabia. Countless miles were marched through the plains of northern France, the deserts and jungles of East Africa, the hills of Palestine. the mountains of Syria and Lebanon, and finally the rugged face of Italy. It's just incredible to think where Cypriot contributions were all across the world in the Second World War. With that being said, do we know how many died of Cypriot descent in the Second World War? Can we quantify that in any way?
We were fortunate enough to be given as Cypriots. I mean, the catalogs, the lists from the British High Commission a few years ago. So all enlistments, prisoners of war, deaths were all listed, and I praised. This is one of the times that I praise how the British are organized. So 374 Cypriots died during the Second World War. Not all of them from action, from being shot. Some of them due to illnesses, malnutrition, etc. But yeah, we have 374 Cypriots who died. They are buried in 23 different countries and lie across 72 different burial sites or cenotaphs in Egypt, Belgium, France, Germany, some of them in Switzerland, a lot of them in Greece, some in Eritrea, some in the UK. We can find some in India, Israel, Italy, Kenya, China, even Lebanon, the Netherlands, Poland. Some of them were in concentration camps. That's Poland. Serbia, the same. Singapore, we have a Cypriot who is buried in Singapore. Sudan, obviously. Syria, Tunisia, Czech Republic. I think that's it. So all of these countries, have at least one Cypriot.
Now, listeners are going to be upset if I don't follow up on this, I'm sure. How did Cypriots end up being buried in places like Singapore and China?
Yeah. So I also had this question, and I had to do a lot of digging to find out the question, the answer. So it was Cypriots who were in the US Army and fought in the Pacific theater of war. So this leads us to not to the assumption, to the fact that they died there and they were buried there, but their parents might have been migrants, themselves have been migrants to the US or Australia eventually and took part there. But they're
that makes sense.
Definitely Cypriots or Cypriot origin, and enlisted with the US or the Australian forces.
Right, which would make sense for the Pacific theater. Were there prisoners of war? I mean, certainly there were, but do we know where they were typically captured and where they were held, and did any die in these prisons?
Yeah, the majority of soldiers in prison as POWs were captured in Greece during the failed evacuation from Kalamata and from various Greek ports as they awaited the evacuation. Much fewer numbers were captured on the fronts of Northern Africa. We need to bear in mind that on other fronts, they were just supportive troops and they weren't actually fighting, shooting. So they were supporting the front line. So the disaster and the failure of the Greek campaign resulted in a number of, especially Cypriot pioneers, as well as men from other units of the regiment being taken prisoners, with the large number of 2,059 men in total. Why is this though? Why weren't Cypriots evacuated? Well, an official policy at the time was to evacuate the British, Australian, and New Zealand troops first, as it would be more difficult for them to blend in with the local population. So imagine a blonde guy with light blue eyes and a blonde beard blending in with the Greek population and not speaking Greek at all. That would be impossible. So at the same time, you have a Cypriot. He knows he knows Greek. He can blend in with the local population. He can find refuge in a house, in a relative, up in the mountains, maybe with the guerrillas, the Greek resistance. So it was easier at the time for Cypriots to blend in with the local population, thus the unofficial allied policy. But this also led to many Cypriots being captured as prisoners of war. We have captains, majors, lieutenants, soldiers being led to concentration camps. And we actually managed to find extracts from Stalag 3D camp in Germany, as well as other intelligence reports, which state that as of November 1941, 230 Cypriots had been taken as prisoners and kept in the Stalag 3D camp in Germany. As we said, 2,059 Cypriots are noted as prisoners of war, and eventually some of them died in the camps. Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots alike. I had a chat a few years ago with now a friend. I became a friend of mine. He was looking for his granddad or his great granddad, something like that, and doing some digging. He did some digging, I did some digging in archives, etc., what I could find from the National Archives in London. And we found out that his great-grandfather was eventually, he died from tuberculosis in a concentration camp in Germany, and he was buried there, so a proper burial location with a tombstone. And he went and found the burial location of his relative. That was, it was really touching. But yeah, a lot of people don't know where their relatives are buried, and through digging in archives and stories, I was also able to be part of this procedure. I was really happy to help.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. Speaking of famous political prison, or not, war prisoners, as many are likely aware, ex-president Glafkos Kliridis, he served as a fighter pilot for the RAF, and he was shot down and captured. Is his story common for many Cypriots? In other words, for more combative roles, were they only able to enlist in the UK, Australia, or the United States, as opposed to in Cyprus?
Yeah, indeed, this was the case. So Cypriots permanently residing in the UK joined the British forces, were not transferred to the Cyprus regiment at the beginning. This happened gradually and during the course of the war, but there was more need for combatants in the British forces, in the US, in Australia, and any other country that joined the war with the Allies or even the Axis powers. So they were joining these forces as combatants. We have, as we said earlier, 12,200 and something men and women joining the army. We have 53 joining with the British Armed Forces, 94 with the Greek army, the majority of them being students at the time in Greece. So they joined the Greek army, they fought in the mountains of Albania, and then those who were not killed joined the Greek resistance. And we have 329 joining the US Armed Forces, and eventually 130 something joining the Australian forces. So yeah, we have roughly 600-700 men joining other forces other than the UK.
Yeah. You know what really took me aback? This contingent of Cypriot commandos. You got to talk about that. What was that all about? What happened what sort of training and prerequisites was that?
Oh, it was a highly ambitious venture by the British in Cyprus. Jokes aside, it was a contingent of Cypriot commandos. It was a preparation to face the worst case scenario. In case Cyprus was invaded, this force would, let's say, meet and greet the Axis powers who would eventually land on the island. It would be the first point of contact. And if the enemy was to advance, they would withdraw to the mountains of Troodos and Pentadactylos, establish a guerrilla force there, and do exactly what EOKA did a few years later, in 1955, 1959, sabotage, cutting communication lines, electricity, propaganda in the cities, etc. So this venture, though, was eventually abandoned as the men who were enlisted drafted in this group, who also had a name, the Kalpaks, the Special Commando Unit. It was eventually abandoned. The men were transferred into other units. Greeks and Turks alike. There wasn't any distinguish between the two communities in Cyprus. They bore Italian carabines, 6.35 millimeters. They were taught how to maintain, assemble, and deassemble their weapons, tactics, acting like a proper commando, but they were difficult to train. So it was eventually they stopped. They had a green commando beret and a special sign, but it wasn't something to be materialized after all. At least they tried.
Before we shift gears, I have one last question about the Cypriot contribution to the war effort. Did women ever enlist in some capacity from Cyprus?
This is another aspect which is deeply unresearched and not many information is out there. So we have, we'll find the information. As I really wanted to do some research about it, but I didn't have the time. And my PhD supervisors eventually told me, well, this is a whole book by itself. So you might want to skip this chapter maybe for a future research, because women in war is a very, in my opinion, is a very, very important subject because it gives another perspective. But nonetheless, we have Cypriot women joining the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, which was some of it was based in Cyprus, some of it was based in Palestine. 778 women joined the Cyprus Regiment and served as part of the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the ATS, and the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAAF. Yeah, they also served as nurses. We know that one of them died during the war and is buried in Palestine. But there are also some stories, some funny stories. So one woman enlisted. She really wanted to help the cause of the war, and her husband took the children, went to the barracks, and sat there until she went out and went back home. So he wouldn't return back home if she wouldn't come back home with him. This eventually happened. She returned home, but yeah, he was very desperate to have his wife back home. He couldn't manage. But yeah, we have a lot of Cypriot women joining the war, almost 1,000 of them. And this is only women in Cyprus. I'm not counting women joining the US forces, UK, Australia, New Zealand.
See, that's incredible. And that's information that I'm really confident is not common knowledge. That women in the thousands enlisted from Cyprus. And I'd like to, again, I can't speak for other people. I can only speak from my own experience. That's just information that I would never have come across. I'd never known. And just to hear that, that just, gives you a little bit of goosebumps just to know how.
Yeah.
For,
The important thing as well is that you also have well-known women, well-educated women joining the forces. So lawyers, nurses, doctors, members of known families at the time. So it was huge for Cyprus in the 1940s, for a woman to take her life in her own hands, overcoming patriarchy, which was prevalent at the time. So it's a very, very important step for a woman at the time.
absolutely. Just to shift gears now to talk
Yeah.
about Cyprus itself and not necessarily, the people who were sent abroad. In a similar vein, what is the impact on the Cypriot people? And I think of women in particular in this case. Like, do we have the same sort of change that we've had in England and in the US, where women are stepping into men's roles in work and that sort of stuff?
Women had to step in men's shoes and do things that they wouldn't regularly do. So jobs that men were doing at the time, taking care of sheep, cows, agricultural works, heavy jobs in the fields, in the mountains. So yeah, this is the first impact. The Second World War was in a way the turning point for many aspects of the island's evolution. So this shaped the future both economically and politically, as well as socially. So the island served the British Empire's war effort in a variety of ways. Manpower, strategic reasons, being an important resource provider for the wider military effort. And these things came not only from men, but from women as well. So from building defense infrastructure, women were also involved as like men. Skills were developed, and these eventually were utilized during the future claims of the island. But it also changed women's roles at home. We should keep in mind that 7% of the entire population was abroad fighting. Women stayed behind. They had the obligation to maintain the household, raise the family that was left behind. And the men who went to war originated mostly from small villages and from the rural areas of the island. We can see the statistics. The majority of men fighting abroad were peasants from a lower income, had a lower income, and the women had to provide their basic needs. The colonial government had to mitigate the effects. These often were not enough, and the people needs were increased. So you had unemployment, but at the same time, what we said at the beginning of our chat today about lifting political freedoms and new policies being implemented. So now we have women's compensation law, for example. A health insurance scheme was initiated in 1943 for regular employees of the government. You have minimum wages laid down for several classes of workers. You have an advisory board appointed in 1942 to inquire into the wages paid by commercial concerns. You have reports coming out and advising the government how to operate. You have an improvement of working conditions for all skilled workers. So these improvements come because of the necessity, and this is the impact on the island. So this is the main impact. I have a whole chapter in the book about the impact, but I would classify these points as the main ones.
Can you talk about the CVF in Cyprus? I was surprised to everything I was reading was a surprise. I got to stop saying that. But the CVF, what was that? Well, I mean, it was established in Cyprus during the Second World War, and what distinguishes it from, say, the Cypriot Regiment, for example?
So the CVF was only initially mentioned in mid 1940 in the summer. So its main task was to assist in case of necessity the defense of the colony. This concept is very broad. What would qualify as a necessity? What is the assistance needed? But this unit was based entirely on the island. It wouldn't go abroad. It was in the form of the Home Guard in the UK, the defense force, which was tasked with protecting British soil from a possible invasion. It was organized and formed as a battalion consisting of the headquarters, rifle companies. Some of them bear arms at the time. Some of them only had duties of watching the coast in case of an invasion of enemy ships, of aircraft being spotted. You have an anti-aircraft platoon. You have an administrative platoon. It was dispersed. This unit was dispersed all over the island. It had mortar, carrier platoons, as we said, rifle companies, signals. It was the home guard of Cyprus. So you also had patrols on the beaches of Paphos, of Kerinia, Famagusta, where a possible invasion could be materialized. You had patrols going around, and these were done by CVF, by the Cyprus Volunteer Force.
You noted that almost 20,000 people were employed in short-term defensive works around the island. Is this a part of this Cyprus Volunteer Force, or is this unrelated to them?
No, this is something totally different. We discussed about unemployment. So one of the ways to tackle this issue was for companies to sign contracts with the British administration and construct defense mechanisms for the island. So bunkers, any other defense mechanism. Yeah. So, and one of the conditions was that you will employ unemployed people who lost their jobs due to the war, due to any other reasons. Any other reason. So yeah, you have approximately 20,000 people being employed at the time, short term, but their wages were attractive. So it was a way to alleviate unemployment at the time.
Going back to the Cypriot Volunteer Force, was there a different demographic that made up the CVF? Like, do we have more, educated, privileged people who made it up?
The vast majority of those who joined the CVF, they were civil servants or were employed in various services of the colonial government. You also have volunteers from lower classes or other employment statuses. These were not rejected, but it was an easier task for a Cypriot to be located in Cyprus, trained, and if need be, go for training in some area in Cyprus rather than go abroad. So they are still volunteers. They still have a uniform. Some of them bear a gun, and it was easier for them to keep their day jobs when they were not on duty, if they had an important job to do, unless it was an emergency measure. They were trained once a week or so. They had their duties, but they were able to maintain their everyday job. So yeah, you have civil servants, you have the district commissioners, for example, being part of the CVF, members of the government, townsmen mainly, but they still joined the unit to protect Cyprus at the time and join as volunteers.
Yeah.
It wasn't obligatory. Yeah, but there was the policy, I was saying, especially for civil servants, it's your obligation to do it and to act as an officer. But for the rest of the people, it was an obligation. It was pure volunteer basis.
You mentioned that the CVF was actually infiltrated by pro-Axis propaganda. Do we have any understanding of what type of propaganda that was?
These concerns were raised by special operations executive agents. After thorough investigation and the information that they had, their concerns were confirmed. So we have some CVF members where they were prone to practice propaganda, spreading lies, saying that our effort is meaningless, false information, this kind of propaganda. They didn't have the space to act in any other way, because once they were identified, they were closely monitored. There isn't any information how this was dealt with, if there was any disciplinary action or whatever what happened to them. But I'm sure that they were removed from the CBF at the point, and they were sent to prison. So yeah, you had the anti-British propaganda spreading lies for information at the time. And this was more targeted for people who were of a lower standard of education and couldn't distinguish between what is good and bad for Cyprus at the time. So yeah, you had these instances. There weren't many, but yeah, there were some people.
And just to follow up here, who was behind this propaganda? I mean, are we talking Italy? Are we talking Germany? Are we talking more local elements?
No, it was Germany and Italy as well. From what we know, because a lot of information is still classified, from what we know, I'll describe briefly an incident that will shed light into your question. A plane, an Italian plane, fell due to mechanical failure in the mountains of Paphos. The operators were, they didn't die. They managed to land the plane. No, they fell with a parachute and the plane landed, managed to, it didn't crash. It didn't burn. So the villagers stole their parachutes because they were made of silk. Silk was very expensive. That's another story. But when they were arrested, the authorities found large amounts of cash, maps, British pounds, US dollars, maps, brochures. So from what we can think, if I can say so, they could act as agents locally until they were found or evacuated from Cyprus. So why does a pilot need large amounts of cash when flying for a reconnaissance flight above Cyprus? It's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, paying people, establishing contacts, this could have been the case. This also happened a couple of more times. So yeah, there is a case here which needs more research, to be honest.
I'm going to quote Battershill here for a second. And this is a quote from him from your book. Cyprus might be the only country that suffered air raids on the same day by 3 different air forces. So clearly there was a need for the CVF, and that will surprise listeners to know that Cyprus was bombed during the Second World War. In fact, there were even casualties. I mean, how often did Cyprus experience bombing, and by whom?
In total, there were 40-something air raids, the majority of them by the Italian Air Force, so the Regia Aeronautica, if my Italian description is correct. Apologies if that's not the case. So yeah, the governor was correct, and he experienced what he said. Cyprus was the only country that suffered air raids on the same day by 3 different air forces. So you have the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. So you have the Italian Air Force, Regia Aeronautica, both operating from the Deccanese, Rhodes Island, and you also had the French Vichy regime in Syria launching air raids from Syria to Cyprus. So yeah, one island, one country, three air forces bombing the same the island on the same day. Yeah, a lot of bombings in crucial places, harbors, mines, airfields. But there was also the deception plan that was done from the British at the time, making mock airfields where they shouldn't exist, false barracks. So yeah, a game of cat and mouse, so that the critical infrastructure would not be bombed.
When I came across that in your book, so my wife is Italian. Her grandfather served in the Second World War, and you know, my grandfather served in the Second World War. And when I read that Italy bombed Cyprus, I gave her a look. I just said, "This was you." This was, you know, and again, something that I don't know that it exists in popular understanding that Cyprus was in fact attacked. You know, I mean, obviously it wasn't. I mean, we wouldn't call it an invasion by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a part of that Mediterranean theater, which leads me to Plan Arcadia. What was that, and why was it drawn up?
An amazing plan. I really enjoyed reading that file from the National Archives.
Okay.
So the Plan Arcadia was created in order to prepare. It was purely preparation for the British in Cyprus for a possible evacuation of the island. In this plan, the island was to be evacuated not in the event of possible enemy movement of Cyprus, but in the event of an enemy attack towards Turkey. So if you have troops moving from Greece to Turkey, then an attack on Cyprus is imminent. So once that happened, once that had happened, Plan Arcadia would be realized. So in the event of the Germans entering Eastern territories, namely Turkey, either or without Turkish assistance, and if the available forces in Cyprus were considered too weak to prevent the occupation of the area of northern Syria, etc., and maybe Lebanon, then Cyprus would be evacuated. The options included the evacuation of the island and air garrisons of Cyprus, with 3 different options. So the first one, all of the motor transportation equipment and stores. The second option is all armaments, leaving behind non-specialist material, vehicles, stores, etc. And the third one, which would be the last option, personnel only. So Plan X, Plan Y, Plan Z, and eventually it was assessed as being very wise in terms of assessment of the island's position and distance from Turkey. It's 70 something kilometers, so a landing force could land in a very, very short amount of time. So yeah, planning was very crucial. Plan Arcadia was the thing at the time.
So kind of let's take us to the end of the Second World War. I presume the CVF was abandoned in 1945, or was the CVF abandoned beforehand?
From 1944 onwards, we have a decline of numbers.
Okay.
The war is taking its course. The defeat of Germany is imminent. Everyone can see that. So the force is gradually abandoned, becomes smaller, slowly but steadily. And yeah, eventually it was very, very big in 1942, 1943. Numbers were on the high at that time, but we have an abandonment of the CVF and a disbandment of the unit in September 1945, when Charles Woolley, governor of Cyprus at the time, he issued a proclamation announcing the demobilization of the force. But some of the men who were members of the CVF decided to join the Cyprus regiment, go abroad, fight in Italy at the time, or garrison duties in any other country, namely Egypt at the time.
And how long did the demobilization take for the troops abroad?
It took a lot of time. So you have a 6-year-long conflict, 1939, 1945. It was understandable that it would take some time. Shipping of people back to their countries was a difficult thing. We're not talking about only Cyprus. We're talking about millions of soldiers at the time wanting to go back to their countries. So it took more than anticipated, and this triggered a lot of reactions from Cypriots. The reaction started from 1945, by the end of the war. So you have the 9th of May, 1945, you have the official capitulation of Germany. And from that point on, Cypriots want to return back, but it doesn't finish, if I'm not mistaken, until 1947, late 46,
Yeah.
1947. Yeah, it took a lot of time, but it's not a Cypriot innovation. Australians were also delayed. New Zealanders, you have a lot of discontent from the Commonwealth forces towards London for not disbanding them and demobilizing them. Riots, Indians as well. So all of the Commonwealth forces face the same problem. But the demobilization struggle for Cypriots is, in my opinion, is very important, as it has a very significant political value. It becomes a political struggle in the end. It links to enosis. It links to political claims, union with Greece, equality, pay, increase of wages. So it also has a lot of social claims other than only purely, let's go back home, we need to see our families. It's multifold, and it has a lot of claims.
So you mentioned riots. How else did they manifest their displeasure? Or was that that is the significant way that they kind of showed how unhappy they were with their situation?
At the time, you have the first instances of political resistance. Well, it's wrong to say the first, one of the first political resistance at the time. It happened during the mobilization. We have political agitation in the Cyprus forces, discontent for the British authorities. Political agitation was becoming more prevalent as time passed, and this was deeply linked to anti-fascist and democratic sentiments, which were slowly, steadily cultivated among the soldiers. Let's not forget that we have Cypriots going abroad, new ideas, democratic values coming in their minds, political values are being cultivated. They were fighting against fascism and against Nazism. So this eventually had a significance for those who were politically minded or those who became politically minded. And we have the first anti-British march from Limassol to Famagusta. The soldiers were told that they will embark from Famagusta to go to Egypt. This was in late 1945. They didn't agree. They didn't go up the lorries. They said, we will walk from Limassol, from the Bolivia camp to Famagusta, to signify and motivate and mobilize villages and towns as well for the cause of demobilization. So we also have the death of one soldier, the death of Takis Kythreotis at the port of Famagusta. Riots erupted, shooting from various sources. Unfortunately, Takis Kythreotis lost his life at the time. This created more trouble for the British, and prison camps were created in Egypt. Those who were not in favor of the British administration, those who were causing trouble, were led to prison camps, working camps. From one point on, they were just left there not to do anything. They didn't have any obligations. They were just locked up. Those who had political actions affiliated to AKEL at the time, affiliated to AKEL and the Cyprus left in general, they were led to prison camps in Egypt, and finally court martials, and then prison camps, and then eventually demobilized when everyone was demobilized, 1946, 1947.
The last, presumably, even with those prison camps that you mentioned, the last were sent home by 47 at the latest. They didn't stay longer in these Egyptian prison camps, did they?
No, they didn't stay longer. Some of them were volunteers, and they said that we want to work for the British Army. They wanted to make a career out of it. They stayed longer, but the Cyprus regiment was disbanded back. It was 1950, 1949. Some of them stayed until that time and then followed a career in the British Army. But 2 years after the end of the war, roughly, I could say, everyone was back home. Yeah. But even you have the end of the war, 1945. You were promised that you were going to go home by the end of the war, and 2 years after, you are still in a prison camp in the desert. Not the most ideal thing.
Yeah. But there were organizations that were set up to support them. The Cyprus Soldier Aid Society, was that a local Cypriot created organization, or was that set up by the British?
Yeah, the majority of the organizations were set up by the British. So we have the Cyprus Soldiers Aid Society, we have the Cyprus Force Welfare Fund, the British Legion, which exists until today. So these organizations more or less had the same service towards Cypriot soldiers: books, welfare, letters, assisting soldiers and their families with loans, grants, in case of hardship. But at the same time, with all these organizations led by the British, or with the British initiative, let's say, we have an organization which is established and led by Cypriots. So this is the Union of Cypriot Ex-Servicemen. In Greek, this is the Enosis Kyprion Apostraton. So the abbreviation is ECA. It was characterized by the British authorities, an organization that gathered together mainly worthless soldiers and those who had a sincere feeling of discontent against the British. This was the case, at least for one part. It was an organization which had a
leftist leanings?
Leftist leanings, yeah. A lot of people in the organization belonged to AKEL at the time. It was not a bad thing for the organization, if you ask me, as its claims were really, really forward. So a lot of claims had what we described earlier, a social aspect as well. So it wasn't just for the soldiers to come back. A social aspect was there as well. So we need our soldiers back. We need to secure jobs for our soldiers. But at the same time, we have to take care of our shopkeepers, of service women, of laborers, of rural men. So it was the start of something bigger than just an ex-serviceman organization. So yeah, we have all these organizations and the Union of Cypriot ex-servicemen with more political claims rather than just welfare for soldiers.
Mario, your book, again, for everyone listening, it's Cyprus and its Regiment in the Second World War, published by Palgrave Macmillan. This was an incredible conversation, Mario. I really, really enjoyed listening to you talk, and I appreciate you taking the time to share this really underrepresented part of his Cypriot history. So honestly, thank you, Mario. This was great.
I thank you. Thank you more for giving me the means, the floor to talk about my passion. I could say that period is still not researched enough. There are a lot of things that are still out there. I wish I would have the time at one point to do more research, but as a starting point, the book is out there. People can contact me if they want any information, social media, email, whatever. I'm out there. Andreas, thank you again for giving me the floor to have this amazing chat. Thank you very, very much again. Wish all the best for the podcast. Keep it up.